Good evening, everyone, and welcome to Digging Deeper moment number 263. The purpose of our Digging Deeper moments is to take God's Word to God's world, and we are so glad that you've joined us. Last week in our study of how to understand the Bible, we saw that looking at Genesis 6, 1 through 4, which speaks of the marrying and multiplication of the human race just prior to Noah's flood, that we've been looking at this through the 5 C's of interpretation: content, context, communication style, comparison, and Christ. And we saw that this yielded a 3-way tie between 3 of the 5 ways that this text is interpreted. Here's a look at our chart. Now, it's a draw, therefore, between the fallen angel's view, the mighty king's view, and the line of Seth view. Fortunately, there's another C we can begin to look at which might break the tie, and that's contrast. Contrast is one of the ways that the Hebrew writers in the Bible communicated their messages. As we've stated before in other Digging Deeper moments, the Hebrew language uses a lot of repetition. This repetition does one of 3 things. It complements what is said, that is, it agrees but says the same thing in a different way. It completes what is said, or it contradicts, or that is, contrasts what is said. And we see this on both the micro and macro levels. The micro level is illustrated in the book of Proverbs. I randomly opened the book of Proverbs, the 27th chapter, and found the following. That's how common this is. As a complement, I found a complement in Proverbs 27:8. It says, like a bird that wanders from its nest is a man who wanders from his place. The 2 parts are saying one thing. It's not good for a man to wander from his home. Then there's the completion. In Proverbs 27:11, it says, my son, be wise and make my heart glad, that I may answer him who reproaches me. The second part of this proverb completes the first by giving us the reason the father wants his son to be wise, so that he won't be embarrassed by his behavior. Then the third one is contrast. We find this in Proverbs 27:6, which says, faithful are the wounds of a friend, but the kisses of an enemy are deceitful. The point is, when a friend wounds you, it's one thing, but it's quite another when an enemy does. Now that's on the micro level. So we see contrast on the micro level. On the macro level, we see complement. We see repetition used to complement. We see this in Judges chapter 4, which gives a simple historical depiction of Deborah's victory over the king of Hazor. Now, Judges 5 gives the Song of Deborah in a poetical form, but they're both talking about the same events. One is straight narrative, the other is poetical. But one complements the other. Then we have the completion on a macro level. We see the story of creation in Genesis chapter 1. It's completed by the story of creation found in Genesis chapter 2. Only together do we get the entire story. And one of the misunderstandings about Genesis 1 and chapter 2 is that there's 2 separate creation accounts, but they're not. In true Hebraic fashion, one gives us a big picture view and another gives us a narrowing view, and putting them together, the second one completes the first. And finally, on a macro level, there's contrast. If you read Exodus chapters 32 through 34, we see God's anger towards Israel when they made the golden calf. It's contrasted with God's mercy in His renewing His covenant by making another set of the 10 Commandments. So we see contrast on a macro level. And contrast can play a major role in interpreting a text. We see this in Genesis 1:1, which says, in the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. Now, we've done an entire Digging Deeper series on this verse, so I don't want to repeat that information, but according to the Zondervan website, contrast plays a vital role in the interpretation of this verse. After a short but detailed discussion of Genesis 1:1, in the beginning, they write, at issue structurally is how verse 1 relates to verses 2 and 3. In the traditional translation, that's in the beginning God created the heavens and the earth, emphasis mine, Genesis 1:1 is a summary of the creation event, and what follows is the details. But they go on to say, if the ancient writer, that would be Moses, is contrasting what the Lord did with the other ancient Near Eastern myths and religions, then the traditional understanding is correct. A major contrast has to do with the origin of the gods. Whereas the ancient Near Eastern myths tried to explain how the gods came to be, the Hebrew does not. God simply always was and is. And the heavens and the earth and the universe has its beginning in God. So we see contrast. So notice how Zondervan, a major Bible translator, acknowledges that contrast plays a vital role in influencing the translation of a text, which means it also plays a huge role in interpreting a text as well. Because it goes like this, folks. It goes like translation, interpretation to theology. That's how it works. We have to first translate the text, then we have to interpret the text, and then we come up with theological truths from the text. Now we can say the same thing applies to the book of Genesis, chapter 6, verses 1 through 4. If Moses, the writer, is contrasting the ancient Near Eastern myths and religions of his day in this text, then this has to be factored into both the translation of the text, which we've seen there's obscurities in the Hebrew here, as well as its interpretation. In other words, it could put a finger on the scale. Therefore, next week, we're going to look at the overall context of Genesis 6, 1 through 4 to determine if, in fact, Moses is contrasting between what God did and what God says and what the religions of his day taught. And I hope you'll join us for this because it will be very enlightening. And hey, please take a quick moment to subscribe to our channel. It will help us greatly.